We're going on a tour of a movie studio Saturday.
That's right.
Wow, I should have moved in with you guys years ago. But I wanted the family now. I'm supposed to help. Oliver, it's okay. I can manage. Well, if you insist.
Did you know that one of the most wholesome TV families in history had some shocking secrets behind the scenes? In fact, the producers did everything they could to bury them. So what exactly did they try to hide from the public for so long? Join us as we dig into the shocking secrets that almost ruined it all. Moren McCormacks struggles with cocaine. Moren McCormack, who played Marcia Brady on The Brady Bunch, lived a very different life off-screen than the cheerful, picture-perfect daughter millions saw on TV. Behind the scenes, Moren was dealing with deep personal pain that very few people knew about. One of the biggest turning points in her life came when she learned a devastating secret about her family history. Moren discovered that her grandmother had died in a mental institution after suffering from syphilis. Even more shocking, her mother had been born with the disease, though doctors had treated her mother, and Moren was never physically affected. The emotional weight of that news was something she couldn't escape. She started to live in fear that she, too, might one day lose her mind.
You know, I was going to crazy parties, doing crazy things. Drugs were everywhere.
To cope, Moren turned to drugs. In her own words, she was searching for a way to escape her thoughts and emotions.
I had come out of a 5-year heavy cocaine addiction.
She spent time in glamorous Hollywood drug dens, thinking she might find peace or clarity. But instead, she only sank deeper into addiction. Cocaine became a major part of her life, and it started to change her completely. She admitted in her memoir that she would stay up for days at a time doing every last bit of the drug, not caring about anything else, not her health, not her job, and not her future. Her drug use quickly began to affect her career. Moren lost out on major opportunities because of her addiction. One of the biggest regrets, she mentioned, was a meeting with Steven Spielberg for a role in Raiders of the Lost Ark. She showed up high and unable to focus, and instead of landing the part, she left with nothing but an orange he handed her during the awkward encounter. The addiction took over her life so much that at one point, she even slept with a drug dealer just to get more cocaine. It was a dark time that nearly cost her everything, including her life. By the age of 21, she had gone through 3 abortions. In her memoir, here's the story. Surviving Marcia Brady and Finding My True Voice, she opened up about these experiences with honesty and regret. She described them as a result of being careless and lost, driven by addiction and a lifestyle that was spinning out of control. At a time when talking about abortion was still considered highly controversial, her decision to share this part of her story was brave and important. Moren explained that the abortions were not just isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of self-destructive behavior. She was living fast, partying constantly, and making decisions she later wished she hadn't. She wasn't ready to be a parent, and she didn't have the support or stability to bring a child into the world. Each abortion left her feeling more broken, more disconnected from herself, and more caught in a cycle she couldn't escape. It was another layer of pain that added to her already heavy emotional burden. Along with these struggles, Moren also developed an eating disorder. In her memoir, she revealed that she suffered from bulimia for years. This was her way of trying to keep up with the pressure to look perfect, especially in an industry that constantly judged women based on appearance. She kept it secret from everyone around her. At the time, eating disorders weren't widely talked about. In fact, it wasn't until the early 1980s, after singer Karen Carpenter died from complications related to anorexia, that the public even began to understand how deadly these conditions could be. Moren was suffering in silence, like many others, because people simply didn't know what bulimia was or how to talk about it. She later explained that the disorder was about more than just body image. It was also about control. When everything else in her life felt chaotic, from addiction to lost opportunities, food was one thing she could control, even if that control was hurting her. Her honesty about this has helped shed light on what so many young women in Hollywood go through behind the scenes. Bobby Brady's battle with alcoholism. Mike Lookinland, who played the youngest Brady boy, Bobby, had a much more complicated life than most people ever realized. While fans watched him grow up in the sunny, upbeat world of the Brady Bunch, his real life after the show was anything but picture perfect. Like many child actors, Mike struggled to adjust once the cameras stopped rolling.
I make concrete countertops, and so come take a look.
He didn't have the typical childhood most kids experience because he spent those years working on set. By the time he hit his 20s, he was finally free. But that freedom led him down a dangerous path. In an interview with Oprah, Mike said something that really explained his situation. He shared, "The problem for me was, I lived my childhood in my 20s. You should really try to live your childhood when you're a child, because if you do it when you're 26, it can be dangerous." That quote says a lot about what he went through. After years of structure and responsibility during his time on the Brady Bunch, he suddenly found himself with no rules, no real guidance, and a lot of confusion. He started partying hard, drinking heavily, and chasing the fun he felt he had missed out on. But it didn't take long for that lifestyle to spiral out of control. Alcohol became a big problem for Mike. What started as social drinking turned into something more serious. The fun nights turned into daily habits. And soon, he realized he couldn't stop. He kept drinking even when it was hurting his health, his relationships, and his chances at work. He later said that he hit a point where it wasn't a matter of whether he should quit drinking. It became a question of whether he wanted to live or die. That's how serious his alcoholism had become. He knew that if he kept going, it would eventually cost him his life. Thankfully, Mike made the decision to get sober. It wasn't easy, but he pulled himself out of a dark place and committed to living differently. After spending over 2 decades in film production, he decided to leave Hollywood behind for good. Instead of staying in the spotlight, he chose a quieter and more creative path. Greg Brady's early drug use. Barry Williams, best known for playing Greg Brady, was seen as the classic golden boy of the Brady Bunch. He was the oldest sibling, the responsible one, the heartthrob of the family, and the kind of teen most parents wouldn't mind their kids looking up to. But off-screen, Barry's real life looked very different from the character he played. Behind the scenes, he was curious, rebellious, and already getting into risky habits at a very young age. While millions of viewers thought of him as the perfect all-American teen, Barry was actually experimenting with drugs before he even hit high school. In fact, Barry started smoking cigarettes when he was just 12 years old. Not long after, he also started trying marijuana. This wasn't all that uncommon for teens growing up in the 1970s, but what made it more complicated was the fact that he was working full-time on a hit TV show. Barry was trying to live like a normal teenager while also being a public figure. It created a strange mix of pressure and freedom. As he got older, his drug use became more noticeable, and eventually, it started affecting his work. There was one moment in particular that really exposed how far things had gone. During the filming of an episode called Law and Disorder, Barry showed up to set high. He had thought he had the day off and decided to get stoned, but production called him in at the last minute. Still under the influence, he arrived glassy-eyed and unable to focus. The producers quickly realized something was wrong. They ended up rewriting the episode to reduce his role because he simply couldn't perform the way he usually did. If you look closely at the final cut of that episode, you can actually see him trying to hold in laughter at times and struggling to stay in character. Eventually, Barry would go on to share these stories openly, in his memoir, Growing Up Brady. "I was a teenage Greg." He wanted people to know that being famous at a young age isn't always as easy as it seems. It can be confusing, lonely, and filled with temptations. His honesty helped paint a more complete picture of what life was like behind the scenes of one of America's most wholesome shows. And speaking of complicated relationships, it turns out Barry's personal life got even more awkward when he started dating one of his on-screen family members. Greg Brady dated Marcia, his on-screen sister. Even though they played brother and sister on The Brady Bunch, Barry Williams and Moren McCormacks had real-life chemistry that sometimes crossed the line between professional and personal. While their characters were part of a big, happy blended family on screen, behind the scenes, they were teenagers growing up together and, naturally, feelings started to form. One of the most talked-about moments from their off-screen relationship happened during the show's famous Hawaii episodes. While the cast was filming on location, Barry and Maureen snuck out after curfew for a secret moonlit walk on the beach. It was meant to be a simple and quiet escape from the watchful eyes of producers and chaperones. But that romantic walk turned into something more. Maureen described the moment they shared their first kiss, calling it long, passionate, and intense. At the same time, she admitted to feeling uncomfortable because of how closely tied they were through their roles. When you rewatch episodes of The Brady Bunch, it's easy to wonder if that real-life connection ever showed through on screen. Some fans have pointed out that there were moments where Greg and Marcia seemed to have more chemistry than just a brother-sister bond. Still, the show stayed innocent, and the actors kept their relationship mostly under wraps. It wasn't until years later, when both of them wrote memoirs, that the full story came out. Their brief romance didn't last long, and both eventually moved on. But it remains one of the most unexpected, behind-the-scenes surprises from the show. Barry Williams took Florence Henderson on a date. During the height of the Brady Bunch, Barry Williams developed a serious crush on his on-screen mom, Florence Henderson. At the time, Barry was just 16 years old, full of teenage energy and curiosity, while Florence was a 36-year-old married mother of 4. It was a strange and awkward situation, but also one that Barry has openly talked about over the years. He admitted in his 1992 memoir that he was completely infatuated with Florence during the show's early seasons. He said that when teenage hormones kicked in, even things that were off-limits became tempting. Eventually, Barry worked up the courage to ask Florence to dinner. To his surprise, she agreed. She saw it as a sweet gesture from a young boy with a crush and figured there was no harm in humoring him with a friendly outing. Barry couldn't drive yet, so his older brother had to take him to the restaurant and drop him off. Florence later explained that she didn't realize Barry thought of it as a real date. She believed she was just being kind and supportive of a young co-star, not encouraging anything romantic. Years later, when the story resurfaced in interviews and fan conversations, Florence addressed the situation directly.
That Barry had a crush on me. I thought we were friends, and he was the cutest kid.
She clarified what had actually happened. She admitted that, yes, technically, it might have been a date because Barry saw it that way, but she never considered it anything more than a casual dinner. She ended the night with a friendly kiss on the cheek and said goodbye. And if you think that was awkward, wait until you hear what happened when Peter and Jan got caught together by the police. Peter and Jan's truck date gone wrong. Even though The Brady Bunch was all about wholesome family life on screen, things behind the scenes weren't always so innocent. One of the lesser-known but wild stories involves Christopher Knight, who played Peter Brady, and Eve Plum, who played Jan. Their teenage romance took a turn for the dramatic one night when they were caught on what can only be described as a romantic almost date in a pickup truck, with candles, beer, and all. It all started when Christopher Knight began to develop a crush on his on-screen siblings. At first, it was Susan Olsen, who played Cindy, that caught his attention. They were both young kids, and their feelings were innocent and sweet. But as the show went on and the cast entered their teen years, things changed. Knight eventually lost interest in Cindy and became more drawn to Eve Plum. She was growing up, becoming more mature, and the two clearly had chemistry. Even Susan Olsen herself later joked in an interview that Eve stole Chris away from her. One night, during filming, Christopher decided to take Eve out for what was clearly meant to be a romantic evening. He invited her for a ride in his pickup truck, and they didn't just go for a drive. In the back of the truck, he had candles, a six-pack of beer, and blankets set up. The plan was to relax under the stars and enjoy a night together, away from the cameras, directors, and the strict schedules of the show. It was an ambitious setup, especially considering they were still teenagers. Unfortunately for them, their quiet night didn't go as planned. The police found them parked in a secluded area and quickly ended their cozy little date. Being underage, having alcohol, and being alone together in that kind of setting was more than enough reason for the authorities to step in. There's not a lot of detail about what happened next, but the encounter definitely brought their private moment to an abrupt stop. This unexpected late-night incident added yet another twist to the Brady cast's off-screen stories, proving that their teenage years were just as complicated as any other group of kids. Mike Brady hid his sexuality. Robert Reed, who played the beloved father Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, carried a deeply personal struggle throughout his time on the show and for most of his life. Reed was a gay man living in a time and industry that made it nearly impossible to be open about his true self. In 1970s, Hollywood, being openly gay could destroy a career. For someone like Reed, who played the iconic all-American dad in one of television's most wholesome families, coming out wasn't an option he felt he had. So, he hid it. Reed's private battle with his identity caused him a great deal of emotional pain. Though he was a professional on set, co-stars often recalled that he seemed tense or frustrated. Some chalked it up to his well-known disagreements with the show's scripts and tone, but there was much more going on under the surface. Reed was dealing with the heavy weight of hiding a central part of who he was. In many ways, the pressure to appear straight, both on screen and off, may have worsened his emotional and mental health. Years after the show ended, Susan Olsen, who played little Cindy Brady, spoke about Reed's struggle in a touching and heartbreaking way. She said, "I can also say that being gay killed him." Her words were powerful and painful. Olsen explained that Reed never gave himself permission to fully love another man or to live openly. He was tormented by the internal conflict between who he was and who the world told him he had to be. She believed that if Reed had been allowed to be himself, to live freely, and form a healthy relationship, he might have lived longer and been happier. Instead, he spent much of his life in hiding, and that kind of isolation took a serious toll. Reed died in 1992 from colon cancer, but at the time it was also revealed that he was HIV positive. Though the immediate cause of death was cancer, many believe that his health complications were tied to the fear and silence that had shaped his life. He was 59 years old. Cindy's hair disaster. For many, the Brady Bunch represents an image of perfect symmetry and wholesome family life. The 6 kids, with their coordinated outfits and flawless hair, seemed like the ideal family. But behind the scenes, that perfect look came with a cost. For Susan Olsen, who played the youngest Brady daughter, Cindy, her iconic blonde hair became a source of pain and frustration. Olsen's natural hair was not as blonde as the producers wanted it to be, so she was constantly subjected to harsh bleaching. At such a young age, this process was damaging to her hair and overall well-being. The bleaching sessions became so frequent that eventually her hair started to fall out in clumps. She later spoke about the experience, sharing how the constant chemical treatments took a toll on her hair's health. The producer's insistence on achieving a certain look, specifically the perfect shade of blonde, meant that Susan had to endure this painful procedure over and over again, with little regard for the long-term damage it caused. The pressure to look a certain way didn't stop there. It was all part of Hollywood's obsession with aesthetics, especially when it came to a show as carefully curated as The Brady Bunch. The tragic loss of Tiger the dog. The Brady Bunch was known for its wholesome family values, and one of the key members of the Brady family was their beloved dog, Tiger. Tiger was the family pet, always seen in the background, adding to the warmth and charm of the show. But the real Tiger's presence was tragically cut short during the first season. The dog was hit by a car and died, leaving producers in a difficult spot. Instead of taking the time to properly mourn or rethink the role of the family dog, the producers decided to quickly replace Tiger with a look-alike. They went to a local animal shelter and found a dog that resembled the original Tiger. However, this new dog had not been trained to perform on a TV set. Unlike Tiger, the new dog was not used to the controlled environment and cues needed for the filming. This posed a huge problem for the crew and producers who wanted to keep the show running smoothly. In an attempt to keep the new dog in place during scenes, the producers took extreme measures. They nailed the dog's collar to the ground so that it wouldn't wander off or get distracted during filming. This unorthodox and cruel method was clearly a desperate attempt to maintain the continuity of the show without losing the dog character that viewers had come to love. Sadly, this decision reflected the fast-paced, often careless approach of the entertainment industry at the time when it came to animal care. After Tiger's death and the replacement dog's lack of training, the doghouse that had been featured in the show continued to be used, but the presence of the actual dog was rarely seen. The producers seemed to have decided that the dog was more of a prop than a character, only appearing in episodes when it was crucial to the plot. Tiger's absence didn't go unnoticed by viewers, but the show continued, and the doghouse remained a part of the Brady family's home. Susan Olsen, a cannabis grower. After the Brady Bunch wrapped up, Susan Olsen, who played the youngest Brady daughter, Cindy, took a much different path than most child stars. While many of her co-stars struggled with the pressures of fame and the harsh realities of Hollywood, Olsen found herself drawn to a quieter life. But with one surprising twist, she became involved in growing cannabis. Olsen's journey into growing marijuana began when she married her second husband, a man who was already passionate about the process. The couple started growing marijuana hydroponically, which is a method of growing plants without soil, instead using mineral nutrients in a water solvent. Olsen herself admitted that she wasn't necessarily fond of smoking marijuana. She often found it made her feel paranoid, but she became interested in the gardening aspect of it. She had always been interested in plants and gardening, and cannabis cultivation provided her with an outlet for that passion. While growing marijuana was illegal at the time in California, the couple continued with their hobby, quietly tending to their plants out of the public eye. When asked about her experience with marijuana later in interviews, Olsen was candid. She didn't shy away from admitting that she was involved in growing it, but she made sure to clarify that it wasn't about her own love of the drug. It was more about the fascinating, intricate process of growing the plants. Marcia's shoplifting. Marcia Brady, the sweet and perfect eldest daughter of the Brady Bunch, was often seen as the ideal role model, adored by viewers for her beauty, charm, and popularity. However, behind the scenes, the actress who played her, Moren McCormacks, was struggling with the pressures of fame and growing up in the public eye. One of the lesser-known aspects of McCormack's troubles during her time on the show was her involvement in shoplifting. This behavior, which Susan Olsen later revealed,
I want to talk to you. Honey, what happened in school?
Was a form of acting out as McCormack dealt with the overwhelming expectations placed on her as a child star. According to Olsen, McCormack would shoplift items from stores while on set, a reckless act that McCormack seemed to use as an outlet for her frustrations and insecurities. It wasn't just about the thrill of stealing. It was about seeking control and distraction from her personal problems. Like many child stars, McCormack was under immense pressure to live up to the image of perfection, both on screen and off. When she was caught shoplifting,
Marcia.
Can we come in for a minute?
Door's open.
McCormack reportedly blamed others, often dragging her friends or co-workers into the situation to take the heat off herself. This behavior seemed to be a coping mechanism for McCormack, as she was dealing with an overwhelming amount of stress and scrutiny, and her actions were a way to escape the constant pressure to be the perfect star. Alice's sudden and tragic death. Ann B. Davis, who portrayed the beloved housekeeper Alice on The Brady Bunch, was an actress whose career was celebrated for both its humor and versatility. She had already achieved success before joining the Brady family, earning 4 Emmy nominations and 2 wins for her work on The Bob Cummings Show in the 1950s. When she joined the Brady Bunch, Davis quickly became a fan favorite. Alice was the glue that held the Brady household together, providing much-needed humor and wisdom to both the fictional family and the audience who watched her every week. Sadly, Ann B. Davis's life was tragically cut short in 2014 when she passed away at the age of 88. The cause of death was a fall she experienced while in the bathroom of her home. She slipped, struck her head on the floor, and sustained a subdural hematoma, a type of brain injury caused by bleeding. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Davis never regained consciousness, and she passed away shortly after the accident. Her sudden death shocked both her fans and the cast of the Brady Bunch, as she had remained a beloved figure in both television and film for decades. It seemed as though she had much more to give, but her life was tragically cut short in such an unexpected and heartbreaking way. The news of Davis's death sent ripples through the entertainment world, especially among the cast members of the Brady Bunch. Many of her co-stars, who had worked with her for years, expressed their shock and sadness at her passing. Maureen, Susan Olsen, and Barry all shared touching tributes to their dear friend and co-worker. They remembered Davis not just as a talented actress, but as a kind and supportive presence on set. She had become a cherished part of the Brady family, both on and off screen. Peter felt like a child star for sale. Christopher Knight, who played Peter Brady on The Brady Bunch, has been open about the emotional toll that child stardom took on him. In a raw interview with Oprah Winfrey, Knight revealed how he struggled with his early years in Hollywood, describing himself as a child star who was prostituted by his mother. He felt as though he was treated more like a commodity than a child, with his career being pushed and pulled in ways that felt out of his control. Knight's mother, who was his manager at the time, had a heavy influence on his career. As a child, Knight didn't fully understand the implications of having such a controlling figure in his life. Looking back, he reflected on how much of his childhood was sacrificed for the sake of his career. It wasn't until later in life that Knight could fully articulate the sense of being sold and exploited for his fame. His emotions were complicated by the fact that he had a successful career on a beloved TV show, but at the cost of his personal well-being. However, Knight didn't let his past define his future. Later in life, he returned to the spotlight with the reality TV series My Fair Brady, where he showcased his journey to rediscover himself and heal from the emotional scars of his youth. This series followed Knight as he navigated adulthood, relationships, and his ongoing struggles with the pressures of fame. It was his way of taking control of his narrative and turning a painful experience into something that could help others understand the dark side of child stardom. If you found this look into their lives interesting, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more behind-the-scenes stories like this one. Let us know in the comments which Brady Bunch story shocked you the most. See you next time.